In today's video, we'll be discussing the evidence for DNA having an origin during the viral stage of life. Hi, my name is Eduardo Hernandez. I'm the creator of Emergent Chemical Evolution, the latest theory in the origin of life. I'm also the author of the book by the same title, available in all major online retailers. Well, let's get on with it. DNA, for all its archival benefit, meaning that its stability, its propensity to be stable in many different conditions in comparison to RNA, it's a more robust molecule. It allows the creation of genomes that are extremely large, especially in plants, where they have much more genes that are necessary for their survival, because plants are unable to avoid their enemies. They have to come up with more proteins for defense mechanisms compared to animals that can move through their environment and avoid with sensory input and central nervous system are able to avoid many dangers without having to create genes or proteins to protect itself. So that being said, the evolution of DNA should have been central. I mean, its core activity of storing this information, replicating this information in order for it to propagate and be the central mechanism for evolution in advanced organisms, should make it the central the most central benefactor of evolution, being that its importance is that it's the way that animals replicate organisms, not just animals, any type of organism, any type of life form. That's the central template. That's the central bastion of information that needs to be replicated. And here is the evidence for the viral origin of DNA. One of the main things about DNA that points to viral origin is that in viruses there are many systems to replicate DNA, all of which are not represented in higher life forms, like in animals or in plants. The type of DNA replication in animals and plants are very unique and are double-stranded, whereas in viruses there are multiple systems, double-stranded, single-stranded DNA and RNA, double-stranded and single-stranded, and positive and negative strands, which are subject for another video. So you have all these different genetic systems present in viruses, single and double DNA, and RNA being the sole RNA, one of the sole genetic genomes for viruses, whereas in animals and plants there's only DNA. And in that system of replication of DNA, you have a system that requires DNA to first, its replication first be done into RNA by one protein. Then another protein comes and takes that RNA and turns it into DNA. So therefore, you cannot have direct DNA to DNA replication. In all systems, viral, plant, animal, bacterial, you first have to turn that DNA into RNA and then into DNA in order for it to be replicated and a new strand of DNA to be created for any other purpose of, obviously, for replication. And that to me screams of a much simpler system of replication, much simpler origin, pre-cellular. And here's another thing. The replication of DNA always takes place with multiple proteins being involved, multiple systems of proteins to be united and form a structure that allows this replication to occur. And out of 30 attempts of these proteins to assemble, only one is successful. You need multiple components of proteins to assemble, and only 1 out of 30 times is that assembly successful. Is a very complicated system of replication of DNA. If DNA is so central to life, wouldn't life have evolved a much simpler system of replication? If it was so easy for life to come up with DNA in the first place, whereas the viral origin commonly held is that viruses originated from cellular organisms and their genetic junk of cells, wouldn't there have been a simpler means of replication? And in no area do we see RNA replicating itself. We see RNA's only replicative or catalytic activity of RNA, the only catalytic activity of RNA we see in any system is that of cleavage. Anywhere we find RNA performing a catalytic activity, it's only in cleavage of RNA. In certain organisms, the creation of transfer RNA involves a long strip of RNA being cut into smaller strips that conform into transfer RNA. That is done by another RNA molecule, which also has the same length and size of a viroid. So that to me clearly points to a viral origin of that system. And again, universally in all organisms, you have DNA needing to be turned into RNA, and then another protein taking that RNA and converting it into DNA before it's replicated. That, again, when we discussed in the previous video of novel inventions during the viral stage of life, you had viruses who are incredible, exponentially replicative change agents for evolution. They multiply so quickly and have so many errors that it is ideally suited to become the creator of proteins that would eventually do such a job of converting RNA, the original genetic material, and having over time evolve a protein that would take that unstable genetic material and then convert it into a more stable nucleic genetic material. That would obviously give evolutionary advantage to any virus that comes up with an archival molecule such as DNA. That would clearly be an advantage to any virus that comes up with a system that allows it to have a genome that is much larger and much more stable. That obviously gives any virus that comes up with that mechanism an evolutionary and survival advantage and a replicative advantage. So that to me is another evidence that shows that DNA originated in the viral stage. And since so many different systems of DNA are evidenced in viruses and not in cellular organisms, and those cellular organisms using a system that is unstable, which needs so many different components to converge and are only successful 1 out of 30 times. Also, the fact that it uses multiple components also screams of an origin that must have been loose, not confined to one area, where the opportunity for those components coming together and replicating have a much more probability of evolving or being created in an open system, such as described by emergent chemical evolution in the prebiotic oceans. And being a product of the chaos engine is a much more probable explanation of the origin of a genetic system that uses so many different components to replicate. And the evidence of Mimi virus being one of those large, extremely large genetic DNA-based viruses that have proteins that do biological functions that are totally different from any found in bacterial or cellular life. So the easiest and most logical and probable explanation would be the emergence of life through emergent chemical evolution and the chaos engine. So those are the evidences that I present to you as being evidence to demonstrate that DNA was originated by the viral stage of life, and that we are the progeny of viruses. Hope this was an informative video. Please spread the word. Please subscribe, share the videos, and if you care to find out more, please purchase my book on Amazon or any online retailer you wish. Thank you.